The air in the house felt like it was holding its breath, thick with the kind of silence that screams louder than words. I stood in the doorway, gripping the frame, watching Dr. Thomas hunched over his desk, scribbling in that damn journal he never let me see. My heart pounded with a fear I couldn't shake. He was planning something, and every instinct told me it was about me. My name is Elliot, and I'm 24, a trans man trying to carve out a life in the small town of Haverford, Pennsylvania. I'd been living with Dr. Thomas Reed, a retired surgeon, for 6 months, ever since I answered his ad for a roommate. It was supposed to be a fresh start after I left my old life behind. But something about him always set me on edge. His piercing gray eyes seemed to see through me, like he knew every secret I'd buried. The way he'd linger near my room at night, the locked drawer in his study, the hushed phone calls I was convinced he wanted me gone. Maybe worse. Haverford was the kind of place where everyone knew your business but pretended they didn't. I moved here to escape the whispers of my past. The family who'd disowned me when I came out. The friends who'd turned away when I started my transition. Dr. Thomas's old Victorian house, with its creaky floors and ivy-covered walls, was my refuge. Or so I thought. The rent was cheap, and he didn't ask questions about my history, which was more than I could say for most people. But his kindness felt like a mask, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me, waiting for something. That night, I caught him staring at me over dinner. His fork hovered mid-air, his face unreadable. "Elliot," he said, his voice low. "You're looking pale. You feeling okay?" I mumbled something about being fine, but my stomach twisted. He was a doctor who knew bodies, knew how to hide things. I'd seen true crime shows. I knew how this could end. The next morning, I woke to the sound of sirens. An ambulance was parked outside, its red lights flashing through the fog. My heart sank as paramedics rushed into the house. Dr. Thomas had collapsed in his study. A heart attack, they said. He was alive but critical, and they whisked him away before I could process it. I stood in the empty house, the silence deafening now. That's when I saw it, his journal, left open on the desk, pages fluttering in the draft. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. The first entry I read wasn't about me. It was about someone named Jamie, someone he'd loved. Jamie was my world. He wrote, but I failed him. I won't fail again. My hands shook as I turned the pages. There were sketches of Mimi face. My hands. Even the way I sat on the porch with my coffee. Notes about my habits. My favorite foods. My pronouns. It wasn't a hit list. It was something else. Something I didn't understand yet. Over the next week, while Dr. Thomas lay in the hospital, I couldn't stop reading. Each entry pulled me deeper into his world. A world of guilt and loss I hadn't expected. Jamie, I learned, was his son trans. Like me, who died by suicide years ago. Dr. Thomas blamed himself. He'd been too late to understand. Too late to help. And then there was me, living in his house. A second chance he was desperate not to ruin. But the more I read, the more questions I had. Why the secrecy? Why the locked drawer? And why did I still feel like he was hiding something bigger? I didn't know it then. But the truth was in his will. Locked away in that drawer. Waiting to change everything I thought I knew about him and about myself. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and regret. I visited Dr. Thomas every day. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed answers. He was conscious but weak. His eyes cloudy with pain. "Elliot," he whispered one day, his voice barely audible. "Check the drawer. The key's in my coat." I nodded, but I didn't trust him. Not yet. Back at the house, I found the key in his old wool coat, hanging in the hall. The drawer opened to reveal a single envelope, sealed, with my name written in his careful handwriting. Inside was his will, dated just a month ago. I read it, and my world tilted. He'd left me everything: the house, his savings, even a trust fund I didn't know he had. But it was the letter tucked inside that broke me. "Elliot," it began, "you reminded me of Jamie every day. Not just because you're trans, but because you're brave in ways I never was. I kept my distance to protect you, to keep my grief from poisoning you. If you're reading this, I'm gone. Know that I loved you like a son." I sank to the floor, the letter trembling in my hands. He hadn't wanted me dead. He'd wanted me to live, really live in a way he couldn't give Jamie. But there was more in the journal. Entries I hadn't reached yet. About a secret he'd kept even from himself. Something that tied us together in ways I never could have imagined. As I sat there, the weight of his words sinking in, I realized this wasn't just about his past. It was about mine too. And I wasn't ready for what I'd find next. The journal became my obsession. Each night, after visiting Dr. Thomas in the hospital, I'd sit cross-legged on the hardwood floor of his study, the leather-bound book open in my lap. The entries were a maze of grief and hope, each one peeling back another layer of the man I'd misjudged. But they also held clues, fragments of a story that felt too close to my own. I learned Jamie had been 22 when he died, just 2 years younger than me. Dr. Thomas wrote about their fights, how he'd struggled to accept Jamie's transition, how his own stubbornness had driven a wedge between them. I thought I was protecting him. One entry read, "But I was breaking him." The guilt in those words was raw, like a wound that never healed. Then there were the entries about me. "Elliot's laugh is like Jamie soft, like he's afraid someone will hear it. I want to tell him it's okay to be loud." I wasn't ready for how those words hit me. I'd spent so long building walls, keeping people out, that the idea of someone seeing Mirali seeing me felt like a violation. But it also felt like something I'd been starving for. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this. The locked drawer, the will, the way Dr. Thomas had watched might all pointed to something bigger. One night, I found an entry dated the day I moved in. "He's guarded, like Jamie was, but there's a fire in him. I see it when he talks about his art." My art. I hadn't told Dr. Thomas much about it. Just that I used to paint before life got in the way. How had he noticed? The sketches in the journal, detailed and precise, showed me at my easel, a half-finished canvas of Haverford's rolling hills. He'd been watching me closer than I realized. The hospital visits were harder now. Dr. Thomas was fading, his breath shallow, his hands trembling when he reached for water. I wanted to ask him about the journal, about Jamie, about why he'd chosen me. But every time I opened my mouth, the words caught in my throat. Instead, I sat by his bed, reading him bits of the local paper, pretending everything was normal. He'd smile weakly, but his eyes held something unspoken, like he was waiting for me to figure it out. Then came the night I found the photo. Tucked between the journal's pages was a faded Polaroid of a young man with my eyes, my jawline, my nervous half-smile. On the back, in Dr. Thomas's handwriting, was a single word, Jamie. My breath caught. The resemblance was uncanny. I wasn't just a reminder of his Sony looked like him. Was that why he'd taken me in? Was I just a ghost to him? The next day, I confronted him. I brought the photo to the hospital, holding it up so he could see. Why didn't you tell me? I demanded, my voice shaking. Is this why you let me stay? Because I look like him. Dr. Thomas's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't speak. He just pointed to the journal, his hand trembling. Read the rest, he whispered. Back home, I tore through the pages. The entries grew darker, more frantic. Dr. Thomas wrote about a fight with Jamie, the night he left home for good. He said he'd found his real family. One entry read, I didn't understand what he meant. I should have asked. My heart raced as I read on. Jamie had been in touch with someone from his past. Someone Dr. Thomas didn't know. And then, a single line that stopped me cold. Elliot's adoption papers. I found them in Jamie's things after he was gone. Adoption papers. My adoption papers. I'd always known I was adopted, but my adoptive parents had never shared details. They'd cut me off when I came out, and I'd stopped asking questions. But now, the pieces were falling into place, and I wasn't sure I wanted them to. I dug through the drawer again, finding a folder I'd missed before. Inside were documents, yellowed with H. My name was there, Elliot James Carter, and Jamie's name, and a birth certificate linking us to the same agency. My hands shook as I realized the truth. Jamie wasn't just Dr. Thomas's son. He was my brother. The realization hit like a freight train. Jamie, the boy in the Polaroid, the son Dr. Thomas had lost, was my biological brother. I sat on the floor of the study, papers scattered around me, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. How had I ended up here, in this house, with the father of the brother I never knew? I reread the journal, searching for answers. Dr. Thomas hadn't known about me until after Jamie's death. He'd found the adoption records in Jamie's belongings, tucked away in a box of letters and photos. Jamie had been searching for me, his younger sibling, given up at birth. He'd tracked down the agency, pieced together my story, but he'd never had the chance to find me. Dr. Thomas wrote, I failed Jamie, but I won't fail Elliot. If he's out there, I'll make it right. That's why he'd taken me in. Not because I looked like Jamie, but because I was his son too. The cheap rent, the quiet kindness, it wasn't a trap. It was atonement. But why hadn't he told me? Why keep it locked away in a drawer, in a journal, in a will? I went back to the hospital, my head spinning. Dr. Thomas was awake, his face pale but alert. I didn't bother with small talk. You knew, I said, holding up the birth certificate. You knew I was Jamie's brother. Why didn't you say anything? His eyes met mine, steady despite his frail body. I wanted to be sure, he said. And I didn't want you to feel like you were just a replacement. His words stung, but they made sense. I'd spent my life feeling like I didn't belong, like I was always someone's second choice. Dr. Thomas had seen that in me, and he'd tried to give me a home without the weight of his grief. But it hadn't worked. His silence, his secrecy, had made me fear him instead. Over the next few days, I pieced together more of the story. Jamie had been born in Philadelphia, to a mother who couldn't keep him. I was born 2 years later, to the same mother, and given up too. Dr. Thomas and his wife had adopted Jamie, but they'd never known about me. Jamie had figured it out in his final months, tracking down the agency, but he'd kept it from his father. Maybe out of anger, maybe out of fear. I started painting again, something I hadn't done in years. The canvas became my way of processing it, all bold strokes of blue for Jamie's eyes, soft greens for the hills we'd never explored together. Dr. Thomas's house, once a place of fear, became a sanctuary. I found his old medical books, his handwritten notes, his life laid bare. He wasn't perfect, but he was trying. Then came the call. Dr. Thomas had taken a turn for the worse. I rushed to the hospital, the journal tucked under my arm. He was barely conscious, but he gripped my hand when I sat beside him. "Elliot," he said, his voice a rasp. "You're enough. You always were." Those words broke something in me, a dam I'd built to keep the world out. He died that night. I didn't cry. Not then. I went home and read the final entry in his journal. "Elliot is my second chance. I hope he knows he's loved." I closed the book, my chest tight with a grief I didn't fully understand. But I wasn't alone anymore. I had Jamie's memory, Dr. Thomas's love, and a truth that was mine to carry forward. The funeral was small, held in a quiet church on the edge of Haverford. I stood at the back, watching strangers mourn a man I was only beginning to understand. Dr. Thomas's colleagues spoke of his skill, his compassion, but I knew the real story, the one written in his journal, the one that tied our lives together. After the service, I met Sarah, a nurse who'd worked with Dr. Thomas for years. She was in her 40s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "He talked about you," she said, handing me a cup of coffee. "Said you were special." I didn't know how to respond. Special wasn't a word I'd ever used for myself. Sarah told me more about Jamie. He'd been a bright kid, funny, with a knack for music, but he'd struggled with his identity, with a world that didn't always accept him. Dr. Thomas had tried to help, but he'd been too late to bridge the gap. "When you showed up," Sarah said, "it was like he got a piece of Jamie back." I went home and opened the journal again. There were letters now, ones I hadn't noticed before, addressed to me. Dr. Thomas had written them over the months, each one a confession, an apology, a hope. "I didn't tell you about Jamie because I wanted you to be you." One read, "But I see him in your strength, your heart." I started reaching out to the adoption agency, trying to learn more about our birth mother. Her name was Claire, and she'd been young, scared, unable to keep us. I found an old address in Philadelphia, a rundown apartment building where she'd lived. I drove there one rainy afternoon, hoping for answers, but the place was empty. the windows boarded up. Still, standing there, I felt closer to her, to Jamie, to the family I'd never known. My art became my anchor. I painted Claire, imagining her face from the fragments I'd pieced together. I painted Jamie, using the Polaroid as a guide. And I painted Dr. Thomas, his gray eyes kind but haunted. The local gallery took an interest, and soon my work was on display, drawing crowds who didn't know the story behind the colors. But the will loomed large. Dr. Thomas had left me everything, but it came with a responsibility I wasn't sure I could handle. The house. The money, it was too much for a 24-year-old with no roots. I started volunteering at a local LGBTQ center, wanting to give back, to honor Jamie's memory. The kids there reminded me of myself, scared, defiant, searching for a place to belong. One night, I found a letter from Jamie in the journal, one he'd never sent. It was addressed to me, his unknown sibling. "I hope you're out there," he wrote. "I hope you're free." I cried then. For him. For Dr. Thomas. For the years we'd lost. But I also felt a spark of purpose. I wasn't just Elliot anymore. I was Jamie's brother. Dr. Thomas's son. And I had a story to tell. The LGBTQ Center became my second home. I spent weekends there, mentoring kids who reminded me of Jamie and of myself. One of them, a 16-year-old named Riley, had the same guarded look I'd worn at their age. They were non-binary, kicked out by their parents, living in a shelter. I saw Jamie in their defiance, their quiet hope. I started bringing my sketchbook, teaching them to draw, to pour their pain onto paper. But the house felt emptier now. Dr. Thomas's absence was a weight, his journal a constant reminder of what I'd lost and what I'd gained. I decided to renovate the place, to make it mine. I painted the walls bright colors, hung my artwork, turned the study into a studio. The locked drawer stayed empty, a symbol of secrets finally laid bare. I kept digging into Claire's story. The adoption agency gave me a LEDA social worker who'd known her. Her name was Margaret, retired now, living in a small house outside Philly. I visited her, nervous, clutching Jamie's letter. Margaret remembered Claire vividly. "She loved you both," she said, her voice soft. "But she was broken by life. She thought giving you up was the only way to save you." Margaret gave me a photo of Claire, young and tired, holding a babyme. I realized her eyes were like mine, like Jamie's. I didn't know if she was still alive, but I felt her presence, a thread connecting us across time. I painted her that night, a portrait of loss and love, and hung it in the living room. The gallery show was a turning point. People came, drawn by the raw emotion in my work. A local reporter wrote a piece about me, calling my art a testament to resilience. I didn't feel resilient. I felt like I was still piecing myself together. But the attention brought something else, a letter from someone claiming to know Claire. It was vague, postmarked from New York, but it gave me hope. I started writing back to Jamie's unsent letter, pouring out my thoughts, my fears, my dreams. It became a ritual, a way to keep him close. I wrote about Dr. Thomas, about the house, about the kids at the center. I wrote about love, not the romantic kind, but the kind that binds broken things together. Riley started opening up. showing me their sketches. One was of a family, faceless but full of warmth. "This is what I want," they said. I nodded, understanding. I invited them to the house, cooked them dinner, showed them my paintings. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I was building something, not just for me, but for them, for Jamie, for Dr. Thomas. The Wills Trust Fund was a blessing and a burden. I used some of it to fund art programs at the center, to give kids like Riley a place to belong. But I kept searching for Claire, for the final piece of the puzzle. The letter from New York was my only clue, and I wasn't ready to let it go. The letter from New York consumed me. It was signed Lila, no last name, and claimed she'd known Claire years ago. She talked about her boys. It read, "If you're one of them, I can tell you more." I wrote back, my hands shaking, begging for details. Weeks passed with no response, and I started to wonder if it was a dead end. Meanwhile, the LGBTQ center grew. Riley and I started an art group, a safe space for kids to create and connect. I saw Jamie in every one of them, their struggles, their triumphs. I told them about him, about Dr. Thomas, about the house that had become a home. They listened, wide-eyed, and I realized I was giving them what I'd always wanted, someone who saw them. The house was transforming too. I turned the backyard into a garden, planting flowers Jamie had loved, according to Dr. Thomas's journal. I hung fairy lights, built a bench, made it a place for the kids to hang out. Riley helped, their laughter filling the air, and I felt Dr. Thomas's presence, like he was watching, approving. Then Lila's response came. She lived in Brooklyn, a retired teacher who'd met Claire in a women's shelter. She was sick, Lila wrote, but she never stopped talking about her sons. My heart sank. Sick meant she might be gone. Lila included an address, a clinic where Claire had been treated. I booked a bus to New York the next day. The clinic was grim, its walls peeling, the staff overworked. A nurse remembered Claire died 3 years ago. Cancer. But she'd left something behind, a letter, addressed to my boys. The nurse handed it to me, her eyes kind. I didn't open it until I was back in Haverford, sitting in the garden, the fairy lights glowing. Claire's letter was short but heavy. "I loved you both," she wrote. "I wasn't strong enough to keep you, but I never stopped hoping you'd find each other." She wrote about Jamie's smile, my stubbornness, things she couldn't have known unless she'd watched us from afar. I cried then, for her, for Jamie, for the family we could have been. I shared the letter with Riley, who hugged me, their small frame fierce with empathy. "You're not alone," they said, and I realized they were right. I had them, the kids at the center, the home Dr. Thomas had given me. I painted Claire's letter into my next piece, words woven into a canvas of stars and shadows. The gallery wanted it for a new show, and I agreed, wanting her story to live on. But there was one last secret in Dr. Thomas's journal, one I'd missed, a final entry, written the day before his heart attack. "Elliot," it read, "I've left you everything, not because you're Jamie's brother, but because you're you. Live boldly, my son." Those words became my mantra, my reason to keep going. The gallery show was bigger this time, drawing people from Philly and beyond. My paintings told a story of Jamie, Claire, Dr. Thomas, and me. Each canvas was a piece of my heart, raw and unfiltered. Riley stood beside me, their own artwork on display, their smile brighter than I'd ever seen. The kids from the center came too, filling the space with laughter and pride. A critic called my work a love letter to found family. And I couldn't argue. I found mine not in blood, but in the bonds I'd built. The trust fund helped me expand the art program, turning the house into a community space. We hosted workshops, movie nights, anything to give the kids a place to belong. I saw Dr. Thomas in every moment, his legacy alive in the laughter, the creativity. I kept writing to Jamie, my letters a way to keep him close. I told him about the center, the garden, the kids who were finding their way. I told him about Claire, about her love for us. I painted him into every canvas, his smile a guiding light. And I painted Dr. Thomas, his gray eyes kind, his hands steady, the father I'd never expected. One day, Sarah, the nurse, stopped by. She brought a box of Dr. Thomas's things, medical journals, old photos, a watch he'd worn every day. He'd want you to have these, she said. I kept the watch on my nightstand, a reminder of his presence. The photos showed him and Jamie, happy once, and I added them to the living room, a shrine to the family I'd found. The letter from New York had one final surprise. Lila sent a photo of Claire, older than the one Margaret had given me, standing in front of the Brooklyn Bridge. She was smiling, her eyes bright despite her illness. I painted her there, the city behind her, a testament to her strength. The painting sold at the gallery, the money going to the center, to kids like Riley. I started therapy, something I'd avoided for years, talking about Jamie, Claire, Dr. Thomas. It helped me make sense of it all. I wasn't just their brother, their son. I was Elliot, and I was enough. The fear I'd felt in Dr. Thomas's house was gone, replaced by a warmth I hadn't known I could feel. Riley moved in, not as a roommate but as family. We cooked together, painted together, laughed together. The house was alive again, filled with the kind of love Dr. Thomas had wanted for me. I kept his journal on my desk, open to that final entry, a reminder to live boldly. A year after Dr. Thomas's death, the house was unrecognizable. The garden bloomed with flowers Jamie had loved. The walls glowed with my art, and the rooms echoed with the voices of kids from the center. Riley was thriving, their sketches turning into bold paintings, their confidence growing. I saw myself in them, but I also saw a future I hadn't dared imagine. The LGBTQ Center named a scholarship after Jamie, funded by the Trust. It helped kids like Riley go to college, chase their dreams. I spoke at the ceremony, sharing Jamie's story, Claire's love, Dr. Thomas's redemption. The crowd was quiet, their eyes wet, and I felt the weight of their stories too. We were all connected, all searching for a place to belong. I kept painting, my work gaining attention beyond Haverford. A gallery in Philly offered me a solo show, and I poured everything into Ivory Loss. Every love, every truth I'd uncovered. The centerpiece was a portrait of Jamie, Claire, and Dr. Thomas, their faces woven together in a tapestry of light and shadow. The title was simple, Family. The night of the show, Riley stood beside me, their hand in mine. Sarah was there, Margaret too, and dozens of kids from the center. They saw themselves in my work, in the story I told. I realized then that this was my purpose, not just to live, but to lift others up, to give them what Jamie and I had been denied for so long. I still wrote to Jamie, my letters a lifeline. I told him about the show, the scholarship, the home we'd built. I told him about Riley, about the kids who called the house their safe space. I told him about Claire, whose love had never faded, even in her final days. And I told him about Dr. Thomas, the father who'd loved us both, even when he didn't know how. The will had given me more than a house or money. It had given me a legacy, a chance to rewrite the story. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't running. I was Elliot, Jamie's brother, Dr. Thomas's son, Riley's family, and I was home. As I stood in the gallery, surrounded by love, I felt them all: Jamie, Claire, Dr. Thomas watching, smiling. The journal, the will, the letters that led me here, to a life I'd never expected. I thought the doctor I lived with wanted me dead, but he'd wanted me to live. And now, I was doing just that, boldly, fiercely, for all of us.